Guys, what's up? Today we're going to be covering the climbing iceberg. So if you're not familiar, the iceberg is a popular meme template where it starts off in a pretty common detail and then increases to more depth as it goes on. So it starts less granular and gets more granular. Somewhere on the screen you should see the climbing iceberg right now. I couldn't seem to find one of these iceberg memes for climbing specifically, so I decided to make one. We're going to start with tier 1, basic level, the Gumby level if you will, and we're going to continue down to the deepest level. We'll have it divided into 5 layers and 1 or 2 videos per layer probably. Each topic will get more obscure and, in my opinion, more. Begin the journey into the depths of the iceberg with tier 1. And first in tier 1 is Free Solo, the Alex Honnold movie. This is a movie where Alex Honnold free solos El Capitan, so he does it without a rope. And a lot of Gumbies will call this, even though the movie's entitled Free Solo, they'll call the ropeless style of climbing, they'll call it free climbing, which is an entirely different form of climbing. Alex Honnold free soloing Yosemite, truly an impressive feat, but the Gumby will start to think that this is the preeminent feat of any sport ever on the face of the earth, which probably isn't accurate, even though it is crazy impressive, and I wish I were half as good as Alex Honnold. Thing number 2 here, Patagonia, the brand. It's obviously a bougie brand for outdoorsy people and relatively rich hippies. You don't see too many hardcore mountaineers wearing this anymore. You'll see some climbers wearing it, particularly if they're sponsored or if they picked it up before they got hardcore into climbing. Patagonia, fun fact, is named after a beautiful mountain range in South America. Next on the list is bouldering. This is the act of climbing short walls without a rope and with pads underneath you. Although sometimes you get up to 50 feet, but that's entirely different type of bouldering. This is oftentimes the first type of climbing people do when they go to the gym, because they think it's safer than top rope. Free climbing is the next one. This is what the Gumby thinks free soloing is for some reason. Even though it's the title of the movie, it's just not lead climbing. So free soloing is under the umbrella of free climbing, but so is sport climbing and so is bouldering. Next up on the list is climbing shoes. This is a pretty well known about one. It's pretty common knowledge by now that for climbing, you need to wear specific shoes that have rubber on them on the bottoms, more specifically a specific type of rubber. The composition works very well for climbing, and a lot of these compositions are kept somewhat proprietary by the companies. They're also designed in such a way that the toe or the big toe focuses to a point and is more advantageous for pushing on small crystals and small holds in general, and more conducive for bending the shoe so your foot sits along the wall. Next up on the list is John Krakauer. He's a lot of people's kind of first brush with climbing literature. He's not necessarily, a lot of people don't necessarily know him for his climbing literature, but a lot of people read Into the Wild or saw the movie, which is climbing adjacent. And so a lot of people have heard the name, and a lot of people read the bio, this book that said, oh, he's a mountaineer and journalist. He wrote a really famous book in the mountaineering space that we'll get to later called Into Thin Air. And as we get further down the list, we'll discover a bit more about him. That makes me not like him too much, but we'll get to that later. Next, we got the phrase, "that looks easy." You'll hear a lot of people say this when they see climbing. Your average frat bro statement, and yes, he probably wears Patagonia. Also, you'll sometimes hear the inverse of this, wow, that looks impossible. Actually, I think that would be the contrapositive. And lastly, in tier 1, we have belaying/rappelling. People confuse these two for some reason. I was hanging out with some good friends of mine recently, and they hadn't really climbed before, and so they went rappelling somewhere, and they were calling it belaying, even though they're like, yes, I was belaying down the cliff, and them show me videos and whatnot. And yes, it was rappelling. And this is a weirdly common mistake for people to make, confusing abseiling, rappelling, abseiling is the European term, with belaying for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. But just to clear up the confusion, rappelling is when you kind of lower yourself on your own power, And belaying is when you're on the ground or on a hanging, more on that later. But generally, especially when you start, when you're on the ground and you're feeding in ropes so the other person doesn't die. People who don't know climbing, as I said, confuse these two. Anyway, guys, that's all for today. That was Tier 1 of Climbing Iceberg. I should have all the topics up on screen. And this is what the iceberg looked like, just for a refresher. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something. We'll be getting into more obscure and more interesting topics as we work our way down further. I'm pretty excited for Tiers 3, 4, and 5. Tier 2 will kind of, again, be topics most everyone is familiar with. But once we get to Tier 3, 4, and 5, I think that at least some of those topics most people haven't heard of. So I'm excited for that. But anyway, that's all for today. I hope you guys have a good week, good month, good year, and God bless y'all.